I am your host, Nicole Will, and we thank you for joining us as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside elders, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversations. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. Hi, everyone. I felt really strongly about having Dr. Cameron Camp join us. He is the Director of Research and Dementia at the Center for Applied Research and Dementia. And he has over 3 decades of experience and dedication to this research of gerontology, dementia intervention, cognition intervention, and he has done so much work to improve the quality of life for people of dementia and different memory disorders. He has lectured all across the world and especially bringing to us the Montessori dementia interventions. Dr. Camp is the creator of the Montessori-Based Dementia Programming. This is such an innovative approach to activities programming that combines rehabilitation principles, educational techniques, using physical and cognitive abilities available to those individuals. This message has proven very successful for engaging people with dementia, and it really is a means of implementing that person-centered care. The focus of this Montessori-based dementia programming is to create an environment that provides respect and dignity to all persons. We are so happy to be able to welcome Dr. Camp. I was so interested in this approach, the Montessori approach of dementia care, and really wanted him to be able to tell us a little bit about his background, what the Center for Applied Research and Dementia does, and how they can help assist people and be a resource to all of us in this community as we look at dementia education. So thank you. And here is my interview with Dr. Cameron Camp. Hi, everyone. We are thrilled to be able to introduce to you a gentleman by the name of Dr. Cameron Camp. He is the Director of Research and Development at the Center for Applied Research in Dementia. Cameron, welcome. We had such a great conversation a few weeks ago, and I really was so happy when you agreed to come on and do this podcast with me for us to be able to talk and learn more about you and what the Center for Applied Research in Dementia does and how this great outreach and resource supports people. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love to hear, how did this passion and career find you? I always think that we come to different things there's always a story behind it. So, and it also then brings us on this journey to be passionate also about what you do and the job that you have. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. My background in graduate school was experimental psychology with an emphasis on gerontology. And so my dissertation research for my PhD involved looking at normal older adults. I actually used people from Mensa. When I got my first job, I was teaching gerontology classes and other classes in the psychology program at Fort Hays State University in Hays, Kansas, a small college out in the west of Kansas. And because of the low population, it was hard to get large classes, and there was worry, we're not generating enough full-time credit hours of students, and are they going to close our university for budgeting? Mm-hmm. So my chair said, you've studied cognition and memory and all of that in your PhD program. That was your major area of interest. So I need you to teach a weekend class, sort of like the Dale Carnegie memory improvement, so that we can bring in extra student hours And because I was a young assistant professor, I said, yes, sir. So I began to study how to improve memory. It was interesting. And that lent itself to some research on how to teach mnemonics and memory improvement techniques to older adults who are living in apartment complexes there in Hayes.
Right.
And so we actually did a study where we taught them how to memorize grocery lists. But I've always been interested in real world application. And so in our study, they generated a list of 25 things they might buy at the grocery store. And we would teach them to remember 10 or 12 of them using these techniques. And then we went with them to the grocery store. We would walk behind them, and the outcome measure was how many items on the list that they looked at before they left showed up in the grocery cart. And, they were paid grocery money to take part in the study. So that was about as real world as you could get.
That really is.
And so I was very interested in teaching older adults how to remember things better. I also studied, what do they do on their own? Without any formal training to help them remember better. So I had a whole line of research going. And then I moved from Hayes to New Orleans, started working there, and began doing some work in adult day centers, especially some that were focused on persons with dementia specifically. The first day health program specifically and only for people with dementia, started up in a suburb of New Orleans in Kenner. So I went there, and everything that I had learned about improving memory was useless. Absolutely useless.
Interesting.
All this, mental imagery and stuff, when you're working with a person with Alzheimer's disease, it was like, okay, this is just not working.
Right.
And at exactly the same time, my son began to attend a Montessori school. And I'd always been fascinated by the idea of Montessori, but I never really knew a lot about it. I just heard about it.
Right.
So I brought him into a Montessori school, and I looked around that environment, and it was like the heavens opened up and the angels sang. That moment?
Yep.
And so I had a friend. Yes, that's it exactly.
Yes.
And a friend of mine who was a neuropsychologist, I invited to look at the school, and I said, you think this is the way? Is this the way forward in terms of teaching people with dementia? And not only did he say yes, but he enrolled his children in the school. So that was like the start. My youngest daughter also then began to attend Montessori school. My wife began to work there in the office and then became a Montessori teacher. And so all of these things began to move forward, but to percolate kind of slowly. And then when I moved to Cleveland to begin work at the Myers Research Institute, it was embedded within a continuing care retirement, Menor Park Center for Senior Living. And so I said, all right, if I'm going to be serious about Montessori approaches and dementia, this is a chance to just really put myself full time into this, because I'd been working on other projects as well, and how to teach people with dementia to remember things using a technique, for example, called spaced retrieval, which was also very effective. Began doing work there at Menor Park in Cleveland, and I'll always remember the first time I really wanted to use Montessori techniques with a person with dementia. It was a woman in a wheelchair, and I brought her into the child care center that Menor Park had for children of employees, and asked her to show a little 3-year-old how to do an activity. So our first work was actually intergenerational, where the person with dementia learned an activity to show to a child. And it involved a range of motion study. You pick up a scooper and you transfer things. In this case, it was golf balls of different colors, and you match them to the colors that you've put into the wells of a muffin tin.
Yes.
And as soon as I saw her doing that and the way she felt, being able to have that role of teacher, and to see the way the child was so involved and engaged, both of them,
Right.
And, like, where was the dementia? It just vanished. It just vanished. And so that was another one of those aha moments.
Yeah, to
And
see how powerful that interaction was.
and I heard from his mother that he went home that evening, the little boy, and said, "I need to get some golf balls."
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah, yeah,
Was
yeah.
impactful.
It was impactful. And so we began to do our work there in earnest. We did intergenerational work. Then we trained persons with dementia to run activities for other people with dementia,
Mhm.
just like in a Montessori school where uh, older children teach younger children,
Mhm.
which is also a great way to learn yourself. And we began to develop uh, activity manuals and manuals for family members to use when they come to visit persons with dementia in long-term care, but also uh, to give them ideas about how to engage people if they're taking care of someone in a home setting in their own
Mhm.
homes.
Mhm.
So for family caregivers who are taking care of people in the community,
Right.
ideas about how to engage the person with dementia. It was also very interesting because when we first started doing this work, we had to answer a really interesting question. What outcomes are we producing?
Mhm.
What outcomes are we producing? And what was wild was that there were lots and lots and lots of measures with regard to persons with dementia that were out there, but they were all like negatives,
Right.
okay? Like measuring aggression, measuring apathy, measuring depression,
Right.
measuring And and so what happened was that those things weren't around when people were doing this stuff.
Mhm.
And I was saying, perhaps rather than measuring the absence of stuff, we should figure out exactly what effects we're producing. And
Yes.
so as is often the case, we needed something that didn't exist because we think in different ways, we move in different directions. And so we came up with this concept of engagement
Mhm.
and how to measure engagement. And there are different kinds of engagement. So there's like constructive engagement where you're constructively engaged in doing things and saying. There's
Right.
passive engagement where you're engaged, where
Yeah.
you're just watching. Maria Montessori said sometimes they must watch before they have the courage to try.
Yeah.
There is engagement where they're looking out the window and they're engaged, but they're just not interested in what you're doing.
Mhm.
And then there was like non-engagement, where they're staring into space or sleeping. And all of these things happen, but these things weren't being captured in existing
Mhm.
measures.
Mhm.
So, we came up with the Menora Park engagement scale and went through various iterations because, we're researchers. And
Right.
so we had to be able to document the effects that were being produced and we had to create measures for that.
Right.
And so now there's multiple engagement measures out there. Yiska Cohen Mansfield has one and others, but that's where it started for us. It was very interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was some of our origins work. And then eventually I formed my own company, which is the Center for Applied Research and Dementia,
Mhm.
and was asked by Manure Park to come back and do some consulting work with them. And I was talking with the guy who was the head of assisted living. And he said, we're going to create a new memory care neighborhood. And I want it to be state of the art. Would you be willing to consult on this?
Mhm.
And I said, I'll do it under one condition, that will create something that doesn't exist. So he looked at me, I looked at him, we shook
Ah.
hands, and he said, all right, but before I finally sign off on this, can I have a hint of what it's going to look like?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I said, yeah, see, the thing is, we want to create a community, and we want to create a community where persons with dementia are able to run their own lives, where we put the person with dementia in control of their community. They take care of themselves, they take care of each other. It'll be a resident-driven community.
Mhm.
It will be a social life template as opposed to the standard models.
Right.
There are four models of memory care in the world, and this is true
Mhm.
everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The first is a prison.
Mm.
And the idea is that the person with dementia is a danger either to society or to themselves.
Mhm.
So we have to keep them away from society.
Mhm.
We have to control their lives because they can't control their own. We
Right.
make all their decisions for them. And, it can be a very beautiful place, but it's still a prison. I talked to a guy in a really nice looking assisted living residence, had a great reputation. He'd been an electrical engineer before he had to quit because of developing Alzheimer's disease. And so I asked him, what's it like to live here? He said, you really want to know? And I said, yeah. So he says, all right. They wake us up in the morning at the same time. They dress us at the same time. They bring us down together and we eat at the same time. Then they exercise us. Then they give us an activity to do. Then they take a break. La, 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 la. He says, it's a beautiful prison.
Wow.
So you can do it with the best of intentions, but it's all about, who has control over your life. The second model is that of a hospital. So the people living there are patients who have a disease that's terminal. There's no treatment for it. You can only treat the symptoms. If you have problems, you give them a drug for psychotropic problems, even though it's not a psychiatric disease. If that doesn't work, you up the dosage. And it's very much like a prison in most ways. If you don't believe that, try to leave a hospital against doctor's orders when you want to and see what happens. And so that's another model. Again, no control. Third model is a hotel. For the hotel model, the people living there are guests. They are permanent guests. You want to do everything for them. Right. You want to make their stay as pleasant as possible. Okay. Mm-hmm. You provide a really nice meal. You don't live in a hotel. You stay in a hotel. There's a very big difference.
Right.
And if you've ever been on a vacation, you stay in a great place, and after a while you say, it's been nice.
Yeah.
But it's time.
Ready to go home. Right.
Yeah. Ready. Yep. That is the person at the locked door of a beautiful memory care residence.
Yes. And they are there waiting to go home.
That's you and me under the exact same circumstance. This is human stuff. We say it's a human thing. It's a human thing. Yeah. And I don't care how beautiful it is, and it's not your stuff. And you don't know the people living around you. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing to do because everything's done for you. Maria Montessori said, everything you do for me, you take away from me. Mm. And that is a very different take. Right. Okay. Right. It means that our job is to enable people to do as much for themselves and each other as possible and then get out of their way. Mm-hmm. Okay. So her approach to education is actually a way of living. And, I always say, if you've ever seen parents who do everything for the child, they can do it out of love, but it doesn't end well. Right. Okay? And often the child doesn't like the parents, and they've taught dependence. We can teach dependence or we can teach independence, but people in our care are going to learn something. And so when you hear that people with dementia cannot learn, that is false. They're learning all the time. Okay, we're just not trained to see it. And so the fourth model is that of a community. Okay, where you have your own home, where you're in control of your life, your schedule. You have choice throughout the day, where you know your neighbors and they know you, where you're part of a community, where you do things together, you have joint goals, and where you're connected to the outside world also. Mm-hmm. And where people depend on you and you depend on other people. I mean, that's where you and I want to live right now. So again, it's a human thing, and that does not go away with a diagnosis. Right. And so what I wanted to do there in this new place was to create a community. Okay, and so how do you give people choice? So I said, for example, decisions will be made by committee and by action groups. Mm-hmm. And so we we set up a committee meeting of people already living in the assisted living who had dementia before the new place opened. We had our first meeting, and guy who was assigned to be the chair, a staff member, was in charge of the dining room. He was drafted. I said, all right, Dave, so what we need to do is invite, like 10 people, written invitation, very formal, but you'll have to also invite them a few minutes before the meeting because they have dementia.
Right.
We should something to eat, something to drink. If you feed them, they will come. That's true of anyone.
Is very true.
Yes. And with physicians, you need to add wine also.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Name tags for everyone, their choice to wear them, but so they can call each other by name, that sort of thing. And so we had our first meeting, and Dave wanted it to be about, what can residents do to assist staff? So we sat down at a long, straight table, and Dave, had everybody introduce themselves, and he said, all right, so we're ready to begin. And a woman raised her hand and said, I have something to say. Dave said, what? Said, I can't see anybody up and down this table. We should be in a circle. Dave looked at me and said, what should we do? I said, sit in a circle. She's right. So we sat in a circle. And then, he asked, all right, so, what should be some ways where residents could help staff? Someone raised their hand and said, I have something to say, a guy. Dave said, what would you like to say? He says, the library is just terrible. And someone else says, yeah, and they've got like books on the bottom shelf. What am I supposed to do? Get down there with my lumbago? I'd never get up again. And another person said, yeah, and who put this, Encyclopedia Britannica in 1954? Who chose this stuff? And another person said, yeah, and there's no labels. Who knows where anything is?
Right.
Dave looked at me and said, what's happening? And I said, you're having a good meeting.
Yeah, really good feedback.
This is their committee. They've decided that this is what they want to talk about. Dave, you're doing a good job. He says, but I've lost control. And I said, yep. That's the point. You've given control to them. Your job is just, to stay on the luge and guide it as best you can. But it's their meeting. This is perfect. So they formed a library committee, and then they had subcommittees that broke out, a poetry committee, and a poetry club, and a guy who wanted to find out who else was a veteran. So we had a veteran committee that came out of that. And so when the actual memory care place opened, we had a template for how to set up committees.
Yes.
And they set up an outings committee. They chose where to go on outings. The first place they went was a restaurant they all liked. The second place they went was a museum. The third place they went was back to the restaurant.
Yeah.
See, an activity director would not have set up that schedule. That's the point.
Right.
And eventually they set up a hamburger tour of Cleveland schedule. So they went to different places and wrote reviews and rated them and took photos. And so suddenly all these committees evolved, including welcoming committee, because you want it, like the welcome wagon. How are we going to welcome people into our community? A visitors committee. So when people came for a tour, they would be toured by residents who were talking about their home. Menu committees, memorial committees. So what do you do when someone dies?
Right.
What's the ceremony that we want? How are we going to remember people? So when people come into the community, when they leave the community, this is what we do. There are places where if a person dies in memory care, they're taken out at midnight or 1 o'clock. That's like living in a South American country where people have disappeared.
Right.
I mean, if mine wasn't there for a week and I asked what's going on and someone said about it, or they're on vacation, I said, yeah, but their car's still, or the moving van is coming, and that's what would make me anxious.
Exactly. The not knowing. I had previously worked in a long-term care facility, and we had some of those same discussions because someone would pass away, and previously it's like they went out the secret back door and no one would see and say goodbye. And we shifted that based on feedback. And it was this beautiful exit out the front door with people honoring them as they went and giving them that same dignity. And it really shifted the culture, because then there was that closure for those residents and staff, and you grow to love them like family. And it was so important. So I can see that. I can see how important that is.
Yes, a person with dementia is a person. They want what you and I want. It's pretty straightforward. And we're trying to kind of like gauge a place where it's at. I love to talk with residents. I love to talk with persons with dementia, wherever they live. And I ask 3 questions. First question is, what do you do? And imagine if you went to a party and you met someone and you said, what do you do? And they say, nothing. Everything's done for me. I mean, how would you think about that person? How would they think about themselves?
Right.
So, doing nothing in our culture is viewed as like not a good thing, as not being very respectable.
Right.
This is human stuff. What is it that you do? That's very different than, this is from a nursing home in Montpellier in the south of France, where a woman would say, well, when I moved in here, I did not know how to write poetry, but I joined a writing club. And now I write poetry. I can show you some. And I have my own Facebook page where I share this is all true. This is all true.
Yes.
Yes. So the second question is, what do you want? Okay. What do you want? What do you want to do? And, another way of phrasing that is, now that you have the time, what would you like to do? Okay.
Yeah.
And so I've seen, residents who form a beer making club, Bend, Oregon, and they won prizes. Now on a regular basis, a local beer making club from the community meets on a monthly basis in the memory care residence with the residents who make beer, and they talk hops, European versus Cascades, dry hopping versus, and they jointly come up with a new formula for a beer each year. And a local brewery, microbrewery, makes it, and then they sell it, and they use the money to raise funds to contribute to the Alzheimer's Walk. $10,000 contribution.
That's awesome.
And imagine, if you will, tattoos and piercings, talking to people with dementia. And none of that stuff matters.
No.
None of it matters. See, it's about living.
Right.
It's about living. It's about giving people a chance to have a reason, to wake up, something to look forward to. And it's what everyone wants. See, this is the different model of care. I love it when staff members tell me, let me tell you what my residents were able to do today without me.
How empowering.
And so we say we give prizes to staff members who do the least, and we give a grand prize to a staff member who does nothing. But what that means is they did the work in advance to enable the residents to do as much for themselves or everything for themselves. Okay. Montessori said we do our best work when we are not noticed. Okay. And so once again, that's a very different model, especially for like activity directors. Okay, imagine, if you will, like 3 or 4 small group activities going on concurrently, all of them led by persons with dementia. And the staff member's job is to assist leaders when necessary and otherwise pull back and just observe, take care of personal care issues, bring someone to the toilet and back. And meanwhile, the activity's going. And if you count heads, that's a large group activity.
Yeah.
But it sure looks different than 30 people in a room being read to over a microphone, a staff member reading from the newspaper with 26 people sleeping. It's hugely different. And so it's a way of living. We ask staff members who are going to go down this path to take what we call the Montessori Pledge. And so it has a number of elements, but I'll just review a few of them. The first is that I will work to create the place where I would want to live. That has to become the industry standard.
It does, because when you use that mindset, it does shift the place of care that you would create.
Yes. Whenever I do an environmental scan, review, whatever, walk through a place, for every element in the environment, I ask two simple questions. The first is, what is its function? And the second is, who is it for? And the second question is a trick question. It's always for the residents. It's their home.
Yeah.
And so, why is this place called the Rose Petal Room? What is the function of that? And why is the sign written in very flowery letters that no one can read? Yeah, and so it's about creating the place where we would want to live. The second is I will remember I'm a guest in the home of my residents, and I will act accordingly. We've all had bad guests in our home.
Isn't that true?
What is a bad guest do? A bad guest chooses the music. A bad guest determines, what you're going to do. Bad guest chooses the menu. When I have a bad guest in my home, I spend as much time in my room as possible.
Yes, that's very true.
And so, why is that person staying in the room? I mean, that's one of the reasons. So, who chooses the music? Who chooses whether or not there's going to be music at a meal? Or how loud? And what it should be. I mean, all these choices that may be made unconsciously by staff, but they're made by staff, okay, that could and should be turned over to residents. What do they want? It's their home. So, it's that second question. Third question is, what is it like to live here? Why is it like to live here? See, those are eye-opening questions.
They really are.
Another element of the Montessori Pledge is I will remember that I must earn the trust of others, and they must learn to trust me. And so, we talk about, especially in Europe, now they've added all four, but we talk about four key elements to a Montessori approach, four key values: respect, dignity, equality, and trust. And so another element of the pledge is I will treat everyone I meet with respect, dignity, and equality. What begins to happen is people realize this is not about dementia. This is about a way of living that's being applied to persons with dementia, but also can be applied to the people you work with, to the people you manage, or ideally mentor, the people you live with when you go home. Yeah, it's a way of living. And so we talk about being able to engage people. We also need to be able to engage staff. And staff need to be treated with respect and dignity and equality. They must learn to trust their supervisors. Supervisors must earn their trust. We need to empower staff. We need to enable them to do as much for themselves and each other as possible. When you use a Montessori approach like this, what happens on a Monday morning is that staff come to a supervisor and say, Sherry has called off today. She's ill. Here's our plan to be able to cover her. That's very different than the manager comes in, looks at who called in, brings everybody in, and dictates, here's what we're going to do.
Right.
It's also easier for the manager. Hello. And this is also the model that people are looking for. This is where the marketplace is going. See, A lot of people say this is all very nice, but it's not good business. Actually, it's great business. For example, I was giving a webinar for the state of Texas on how to create person-centered care in communities for persons with dementia. And so I was talking about a Montessori approach to meals. And what I was saying was, all right, so you need to have resident committees for menus. And when residents are having a meal, they need to see the options. They need to be able to choose the options at that time, not off of a written menu. How many times have you been to a restaurant and you choose something off the menu, someone else chooses something else, the food comes and you say, oh my gosh, I wish I'd have ordered that.
That happens so often. You look over at the
Yes.
table and go, that looks really good. I wish I
Yes,
had
and in memory care, sometimes people say, no, I don't want this, I want that. And so this entree goes back. So when you can actually see your option and choose how much you want, okay, as opposed to everyone gets the same large portion or whatever, then it's more economically viable. So during the webinar, we had some people in the audience and we're broadcasting live. A woman who was an executive director of a place said, is this really possible? And a guy named Matt Stanley, Sundance Memory Care, where they've adopted this approach, stood up, another executive director and owner. And he said, when we adopted this approach, we reduced our food costs by 40%.
How incredible.
This is not just being nice. Okay? This is actually the good business model. This is what the market wants. This is what families want. Your families are happier, residents are happier, staff are happier. When Montessori approaches are implemented, you see really interesting outcomes like a huge reduction in the use of psychotropic medications, especially PRN, as needed.
Yeah.
Because when people are engaged through the day, when you're engaged, you're not going to be exhibiting what we call responsive behaviors.
Right.
When you're engaged, you're at your best. You're not at the door saying, I want to go home because you're leading a German club, okay, group meeting. You see a huge reduction in the use of hypnotics of sleep. Yes, because when you're active during the day, surprise, surprise, you sleep at night.
Right.
And if you give someone a sleeping aid, an older adult with dementia, probably in their 80s, the drug lingers during the day. And so they're sitting there in a chair, sleepy, chin on their chest. And then at night, they need the drug to get to sleep. This is like 5 kinds of crazy.
Right. It is.
And so you save on like the cost of the meds, but you also save on all of these other things like falls, because you don't have these residual effects of medication in the system. You see increase in weight. You see increases in activities of daily living. You see increases in length of stay. You see decreases in falls. You see decreases in accidents, staff and residents. You see decreases in staff turnover. You see increases in census, increases in satisfaction measures, family, residents, staff. It's the right way to go. It's a good business model. Those other 3 models, the prison, the hospital, the hotel, they come at us from wildly different systems. And it's not where people want to live. And it's not where they live well, no matter what the trappings. And so, a Montessori approach based on these principles, based on these values, and then using very specific principles to implement these values is what people want. I'll always remember at our demonstration site there in Menora Park, it was called Helen's Place. The residents wrote their own rules for visitors. And the first one was, no tours during meals, which I wouldn't.
Good idea.
They said, no one wants to be looked at while you eat.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yes.
But they do that so often.
Yes. And who made that decision?
Mm-hmm.
And then they said tours during programming is fine. Then they said wait to be toured by a resident volunteer. So they have the resident tour committee. Okay. Mm-hmm. No cussing no spitting, no profanity, okay, because they didn't have it in their community. They didn't want it brought in. And the last thing was my favorite. They said, no shoes on the furniture.
I like
Once
that
again,
one. Yeah.
yeah, that was my favorite, actually.
Right.
Because where do you tell people not to put their shoes on the
At
in your
home.
home?
Mhm.
At home. At home. It is sending such a clear message that this place is our home.
It
Okay.
is.
Yeah. And so it's reflected in things like, and so the model of a home embedded in a neighborhood that's part of a community that's connected to the outside world. And so, for example, there's a place in Largo, Florida, north of Tampa, that took on this approach. And the residents decided to have a social concerns committee. And every quarter, they would pick a different social concern to work on. So one quarter, they raised food for a food bank that was housed in a local church. For their outing, they packed up the food and they took it to the church, to the food bank. That's very different than an outing where everyone gets in a van and you look at the fall leaves.
Right.
Right? There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the only thing you do to get people off of, why should a person leave? Another quarter, they put together toiletry packets and brought them to people in a homeless shelter. And when they pulled up, the staff were like, what do we do? And the resident just, follow me. Went in, started passing them out, hugged people, these days before COVID, told people, we're praying for you, life's going to get better. And then, they said, it was amazing how little things like being able to brush your teeth matter. And you don't think about it until you can't.
And really being able to give back really shifts, and we all feel better when we're able to help someone and bring joy to someone. And that doesn't change, like you said, that it's humanity.
Yes. And that's when we're at our best. So to enable people to do that, regardless of what their diagnosis might be, that is the gift that we give, to get out of their way. Okay. Montessori said the child will lead us, right? Well, the residents will lead us if we give them the opportunity. So many times when I discuss things like, what do you want? Residents in memory care will look at me and say, will we be allowed to do that? Yeah, I mean, they understand this issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know you touched on this before, but briefly explain what exactly is the Montessori method or principles, and how does that translate for people at home or in a facility? If you were to kind of distill it down, what does that look like?
Yeah, so there are some key principles that are followed in any setting. The first is to offer choice. And so if a person with dementia has difficulty making choices, you hold up, like, would you like to wear this blouse or this blouse? And they can just point. A two-pronged choice is a lot easier than, what would you like to wear today?
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And sometimes it's been so many years since they've been allowed to make a choice that they don't have confidence either in their ability to do it or that any choice would be honored. So you may have to say, well, I'll just hold up one blouse. How about if we wear this blouse? But it's still a yes, no.
Right.
And they can be retrained, basically. They can relearn how to make choices and to have confidence that their choices will be honored. Giving choice, inviting. And so here's a little thing that's a big thing. When you invite someone, you do not say, can you help me? We have to get rid of the word can. Can is a test. And if they do, it's like you expected it. It's no big deal. And if they can't, it's like they fail. So we say, would you help me? Would you? In French, we say, pouvoir c'est l'ennemi. Can is the enemy. Okay. Voulez-vous? Would you?
Right.
And so would you gives the control to them. And they have a choice. And once again, they can say yes or no. And sometimes they'll say no just to see if you will honor their choice. But if you're the person who gives choice, they can learn to trust you. They can learn to trust themselves, and they can learn to like you. They're going to learn to like you or hate you, and that'll be based on the way you make them feel. That will be on the feelings that are listed after and during your interactions. So we give choice. We match our speed to their speed. These are all rehabilitation techniques because Montessori's background was in rehabilitative medicine and pediatrics.
Okay.
So she used rehabilitation techniques to teach. Okay. They will learn through their hands. They'll learn by doing. These learning systems that arrive early in life, that were the basis of Montessori approaches, are still available to people with dementia if we want to look for them and use them. See, it's like location learning. Persons with dementia learn where to sit for their meal. Okay? And the test for that is to put somebody else in that chair at lunch before they get there.
They'll tell you.
They will tell you.
Yes.
They learn this after they moved into a place because of a diagnosis of dementia. People with dementia are learning all the time if we want to use that. And so we match our speed to their speed. We break things down into steps. Always demonstrate. Always demonstrate. So if you want a person with dementia to recover the capacity to brush their own teeth, then you'll probably have to come in with 2 toothbrushes and 2 tubes of toothpaste. And to step 1, you do something, they imitate. Step 2, and they learn very quickly. You do it, I do it. You do it, I do it. And they can recover that capacity to brush their teeth or brush their hair if you demonstrate and give them practice. They get better with practice. Okay, that's a human thing. It's a learning thing. They may not remember that they practiced the episode, but the effects of practice accumulate, as well as their confidence in their ability to do something. So we always demonstrate. We break steps down into tasks, tasks down into steps. We go from simple to complex. These are all principles that guide us. These are all principles that let us know if we're doing it the right way. And we treat everyone, with respect and dignity and equality. So we have like 12 key principles. And we always look at those before we act. Okay. Are we
guiding?
Yes.
Guiding light, so to speak, to be able to walk people through that, which is so helpful when you're unsure and haven't been in that environment before. It can be really, really helpful.
Yes, exactly. And so, we always say, slow down. Short phrases. Are you demonstrating? We say, give them something to hold. So what do they manipulate? External aids. So for example, my mother-in-law came to stay with us for a summer. She had Alzheimer's, and her son, my wife's brother, brought her. She had been living with my brother-in-law's family. He was doing a summer internship at the Cleveland Clinic. And so he goes to the clinic, and after half an hour, her mother goes to my wife and says, where's my son? And my wife says, he's at the clinic. He'll be back at 5:30. So we find the answer that satisfies. 5 minutes later, where's my son? My wife, Montessori teacher, also works with me, goes to the kitchen counter, brings her mom, writes a message, big print, your son, his name is at the Cleveland Clinic, he'll be home at 5:30. The content that she knew would work. She asked her mother to read it. So you make sure that the external aid is effective and can be used. Tapes it to the counter, because otherwise it'll be put in a safe place.
Yeah. So safe.
We've made the mistakes. Montessori said, I welcome my mistakes, because this is how we learn, how we get better. And so 5 minutes later, where's my son? There's a message about that. Let's go see. And walks with her mom to the message. Points. What does it say? Doesn't read it for her mother. Her mother reads it out loud. She knew she could do it beforehand. The message reduces the mother's anxiety. That's right. When you want to know where your son is, we'll come here. 30 minutes later, where's my son? There's a message about that. Let's go see. And with like 2 or 3 practices, for the rest of the day, when her anxiety would rise, her feet would carry her to this location. She had learned to go to this location when her anxiety rose. The message reduced her anxiety. So the reduction of anxiety becomes associated with the location. And my wife is taken out of the loop. And that was used for the rest of the stay. Simple, effective,
helpful.
Enables her mom to reduce her own anxiety. And the cost is a piece of paper and a different way of thinking about dementia. So the Montessori approach gives us a different way of thinking about dementia. We see it as a disability rather than as a disease. And so we use rehabilitation techniques to circumvent disabilities, using the capabilities people still have, including their ability to learn new things in systems that have not been impaired by dementia. And when we do this, we get control over what we're told is uncontrollable. If you believe a person with dementia can't learn, then everything I've just said shouldn't be possible. And that's why I say, when you hear that, it's just not true. We just need to know how to teach. And Maria Montessori was a genius at using these learning systems as an educational tool for young children. We adapt these to use with older adults. We never treat an older adult like a child. How could you do that and still treat them with respect and dignity? And so this is why we ask the questions, the big three. These are the principles that guide us, and they're based on these values, these very human values about how to live a good life.
And you can see those tangible outcomes, that improved self-confidence, that dignity. They are able to have hope and engagement. We need to shift our culture's perception of dementia into this new way of thinking. I think it's so important. And like you said, rather than focusing on the deficiencies, we're focusing on what are those positive outcomes that are happening.
Yeah, it's about living well with dementia, just like we try to live well with cancer, live well with diabetes, live well with any chronic condition. There are people who are perfectly healthy who do not live well, and there are people who are severely ill who do live well. You mentioned hope. Maria Montessori said, "We sow seeds of hope," and this is what we do. This is our mission. See, I don't have a job. I left a job in the rearview mirror a long time ago. I have a mission, and the people who follow this path have a mission. It's a good business model. So I can talk to people about, don't you want to make money, if that's the way to help the persons with dementia, but it's a mission. It's what we have to do, not only for persons with dementia now, but for ourselves. The system of care that we create is the one we're going to inherit, and it's the one we'll deserve.
That is so powerful, because we are creating, like you said, systems and healthcare environments that we will be growing into. And so what do we want that to look like? And how do we want that community to function? And when you use that lens on it, it really shifts, okay, how do we make that happen and make it a place where we want to live? You talked about Maria Montessori. For people that don't know her background, she is from Italy, correct?
Yeah, she was the first female physician in Italy. Got her training in Rome at the turn of the 20th century. Started the first Montessori school when she was like 37 in 1907. And her training as a physician and in rehabilitative medicine to work with children who were impoverished. First school was in the poorest section of Rome, and was an observer. Okay, she said the first job is to observe, to get to know, how people think, who they are. And that's really true, in our work. We have to know the person. We have to know the person. We have to create prepared environments for the individual. And so, can they bring in their own chair? If they're moving into a residence, can they bring their own quilts and blankets? How can we make the place where they move in a home instead of a hotel or hospital or whatever? So so that was her approach. And She began to do her work in other parts of Italy, and then began her work around the world. The first American Montessori Society had Theodore Roosevelt's daughter and Alexander Graham Bell's wife on the board. She came to America relatively early on. Now there are Montessori schools around the world, literally. And now there are Montessori-based care systems for persons with dementia around the world. Australia, Singapore, throughout Europe, Canada. Yeah, we've done work in a lot of different places and we're still expanding. We have a colleague in Indonesia, another one in Brazil. And so it's universal.
It is universal. I had traveled to Japan last September and was encouraged but also surprised. I don't know why I was surprised because it makes sense how universal humanity is. Seeing the assisted living there and how I didn't have a chance to go inside at the time, but being able to learn more about it, their activity programming was very similar to what we do in the same structure. And really you can see how universal caring for our aging is in a setting. And what's really exciting about that is when methods like this are adopted and that training can be given around the world, and that excitement and that mindset can be really shifted and encouraging for people, and we can learn from each other, because I think we learn from those different cultures because they are implementing really exciting things as well, and it's building, we're able to build those blocks on that foundation with each other.
I'll tell you a final sort of cultural Montessori story. Mm-hmm. So I'm at Menora Park and I'm adapting an activity my wife developed for working with 3-year-olds. So you get a plastic tub and you fill it almost to the top with rice. And buried under the surface of the rice are some objects, like 8 of them. And next to the tub is a piece of paper with 8 circles. So you give someone a long-handled spoon with slots, and you dig into the rice and you find an object, you lift it up, you shake the spoon, and it sifts the rice through the slots. And then you put the object on one of the circles. Now, what you're looking at also is upper body range of motion, voluntary, which is in the MDS system. Mm-hmm. You're looking at eye-hand coordination. You're looking at fine gross motor skills. And also you've created an external frontal lobe because you have these external 8, right? One of the Montessori principles. So you can see how many circles have an object on them, how many don't. So you don't have to store that information internally. You can sequence and memory, all that stored external. So I'm there at Menora Park, which was Orthodox Jewish facility. And I showed it to the rabbi. He says, well, it's a great activity, but we cannot use it during Passover. And I said, why? He says, you cannot touch uncooked grain. I said, Rabbi, they're not going to eat it. He says, don't ask me to argue with God. So it was a great activity, except for 2 weeks out of the year.
Right.
So then we had a woman from Japan who'd come over and ultimately translated one of our manuals into Japanese, published over there. Mm-hmm. And she said, you cannot use rice. I said, what do you mean? She says, no, every grain of rice is sacred. Can we use something like lentils? Okay, so lentils. And then we had a Fulbright scholar over from India, and she said, not put just anything into the rice, put rocks. I said, why rocks? It is an activity of daily living. It's because you have these small farms and they grow their own rice. You have to clean it before you cook it.
Yes.
So not only do you have to translate into other language, but into other culture, but you can. And the same abilities are able to be accessed and improved using the activity. But the specifics need to be adapted to the culture, and they can be.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So are you finding, is there a shift with having COVID-19 enter our world? Are you finding that people are really reaching for lifelines of how to people engaged. I know a girlfriend of mine, we spent time visiting with a woman that has dementia in a senior living facility, and I am not able to be in there right now. She is able to still be there, and being able to not utilize the whole facility like we previously had with walking or those activities of daily living like setting the table. So what are you seeing as we're managing infection control and limited ability to be out, so to speak, around the facility or community? How are we overcoming those challenges?
Right. So, first, anyone listening to the podcast, I would invite you to go to our website, which is www.cen, that's Charles Edward Nancy, the number 4, ARD, Alan Robert David.com. We have some pages for free resources, some pages for dealing with COVID, some webinars that we've done on this particular topic. I did an entire hour webinar with Direct Supply that we can give you the link to, also on engaging persons with dementia during COVID. So it's a great question.
Yes, that's
First,
perfect. And we'll include all of those resources on our episode notes for the podcast. So for people listening, we'll include all of that for people.
So a couple of things, just in general, what we're finding is that places that have adopted the Montessori approach seem to be doing better in terms of coping. Second, there are really interesting examples, like where in Washington State for the place run by Windsong that uses this approach, that the person who's head of the dietary taught a resident with dementia how to use FaceTime so that he could still visit with his family members. It was a learning thing, but she also said this is probably more important than anything I did in the kitchen that day. And it's a place where she was allowed and encouraged to spend the time with the resident to do that. Another place, again, by Windsong, where they had big, like 5-gallon containers that were filled with earth, and residents had these, socially distant spaced, each had their own plant to garden. And so they chose what they were going to grow. And so you had this outdoor garden of these pots. And then staff would also put some on a cart and bring them inside to show people who weren't leaving their room, things that were growing in the garden. So there are ways, okay? There are a number of techniques. And then also our colleagues in France developed some resources for care partners. So brief things on mindfulness, on breathing exercises, and these are available free. They're downloadable, printable, because you have to also be able to take care of yourself. These are also able to be used by persons with dementia. So we've done work on mindfulness for persons with dementia. To be able to just take breaks during the day and to kind of reset. And so as a brief answer to your question, those are some things that we've been working on and developing. And we also have some of our reading stories that are now recorded and online, so you can listen to stories about. One's about my dad. It's called The Reluctant Marine. You'll have to hear the story.
Yes, I will. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Well, this has been so helpful, and I think really looking at it from the perspective of we are just growing in a way of creating a greater humanity and for the greater good. And who wouldn't want to have that be a part of not only their life, but their loved one's life and the life of a senior care facility. So thank you for taking the time, for visiting with us, and all of your knowledge and insight. And people will be able to have access to the resources that you provide, because you not only offer training and resources, webinars, and all of the different education tools that family members, seniors, and senior care facilities and senior living employees can find and access and utilize all of that. So
it's a pleasure. And I'll finish with the last line of the Montessori pledge.
Yes, please do.
I will treat everyone I meet the way I wish to be treated.
I think that's something we all should live by.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron Camp. And
it was a
we'll
pleasure, Nicole.
More.
Yeah, that would be a hoot. I would love it. Take care.
Too.
Thank you for this invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.